what is the real issue here? Because I don't think it's just about how do we save the rainforest, how do we repair the ozone layer, how do we remove the third world debt. All these are symptoms of a deeper problem, which is a problem of human consciousness, of human values. And what I believe is, and this is what I was saying to them, if you only treat the symptoms, the disease will continue.
Hello, I'm Hazel Henderson, and welcome to another edition of Worth Quoting, the open campus series of the Florida Community College in Jacksonville. Today, our guest is Peter Russell, who is a British management consultant and has a very interesting book called The Creative Manager: Finding Inner Vision and Wisdom in Uncertain Times. Welcome, Pete. I'm delighted to have you here. Pete is an old friend of mine, and we have been thinking about a lot of the issues we're going to talk about today for many years. The issues of globalization and a new world order. And my feeling is that there are really 6 great globalization processes that are going on in the world today. The process of industrialization and the spread of technology around the world, you know, jets and satellites and all of the rest of it. And then there's the globalization of the financial system, where we have stock markets going on all around the world and all of this hot money sloshing around the planet. The third great globalization is the globalization of employment, where we have companies going all over the world now looking for cheaper labor to hire, and at the same time workers are now wanting to migrate over borders, whether it's Eastern Europeans wanting to go to Western Europe in search of the good life, or Mexicans coming to the US. And then the fourth great globalization is that of human effects on the biosphere, where we're creating holes in the ozone layer and desertification with our careless technology. And the fifth great globalization is that of the arms trade. And although the Cold War is over, and obviously Japan won, we are now in a whole new regime where everybody is sort of looking around the world, who are the new enemies going to be, and the old military forces in the world want to stay in business and keep up their budgets. And then the sixth globalization is the globalization of culture, where all over the world people are in African villages are watching Dallas and looking at our kind of northern lifestyles and saying, hey, why couldn't we have that too? And in a sense, all of these processes are causing some very interesting new effects that Pete and I are going to talk about. One is the loss of national sovereignty, where leaders now are all trying to choose up new alliances, whether it's Europe 1992 or North American Free Trade Zone, or whether it's the Japanese getting together with allies in the Pacific Rim. And at the same time, there's this process of acceleration. And I know that this is one of the areas that you focused on a lot, Pete. So I'd like to get your views of this all of these globalization processes and how you see them from your perspective.
Yes, I think the acceleration to me is one of the most interesting things. And I see the acceleration that we're seeing today in the pace of life, whereby everything's going faster and faster and people complaining like it was in their parents' time, is something which has been going on throughout the whole of human history. Things are much faster now than they were before the Industrial Revolution, but even then they were much faster than they were, say, 10,000 years ago. And I see that process actually goes right back through the whole of evolution. To start off with, evolution took billions of years just to evolve simple cells, and then it got fast. You start measuring in millions of years, then hundreds of thousands. And the reason things speed up in any evolutionary process is positive feedback. It's like each new advance makes it easier for the next new advance. And you see this in evolution with, for example, sexual reproduction. Before that, cells divided and spread that way, which was a very slow process of evolution. With sexual reproduction, they came together, shared information, and the new cell was a combination of genetic information. That made evolution about 1,000 times faster. And you can see the same things happening in human culture. For example, the Industrial Revolution speeded up the process of distribution, of transport, of manufacturing. So when the Information Revolution comes along, we don't have to reinvent mass production or transport. We can plug computers into that system, the manufacturing of computers, distribution. And so that's one reason why the Information Revolution has caught on so much faster than the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution took about 100 years to catch, whereas the Information Revolution took about 25 years to catch. And now with robotics and all these things coming online, the next revolution is going to be even faster still. So I think we're going to see change, whereas now we measure in decades, we're going to start seeing similar changes in periods of 2 or 3 years.
It's interesting, isn't it? You know, because when I first went to Japan back in the early 1970s, I was speculating in a piece I did for some journal that this process of the Industrial Revolution sort of taking 300 years in Europe, and then the northeast of the United States went through it in about 150 years. Yes. And I was predicting back that Japan would have a very short ride through the industrial process. And look where Japan has come out today, beginning to bog down in the bubble economy, which is now burst. They're now developing their own recessions and their own unemployment and the same kind of problems that we're having here. And what I tried to concentrate on was that everybody was using these policy tools that were based on macroeconomics. And of course, as you know, underlying the assumption underlying all macroeconomic models is that everything's in equilibrium and it's kind of going to come back to normal. You know, and all economic statements, you know, they say when things come back to normal, this and this and this. And so here we've got this explosive process of global transformation, and we're still using tools that are based on equilibrium. So, you know, that's why I'm trying to talk all the time about the paradigm shift and how we have to shift all of our policy tools.
Is that what you're talking about in your new book? What's it? Paradigms in Progress?
Pretty
Life
much.
Beyond Economics?
Yeah, pretty much. And it's hard to get people to understand what I mean by life beyond economics because everybody is sort of so taken with the idea that economics is the only ballgame in town and you manage societies using economic models. And yet now, of course, most of my smart economist friends are finding chaos theorists to take to lunch you know, because they know somehow that they've lost control. Now, you write about chaos theory also. So tell me what you think about
Well, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about chaos theory because mathematically it isn't about chaos as you or I mean chaos in everyday conversation. It's actually about unpredictability. And what chaos theory says is in certain very complex systems, they could be very highly ordered in some ways, but they are totally unpredictable. And I think that's what is happening in the world today because of this globalization that you're talking about and the acceleration of the globalization. We're moving into a future whereby we cannot predict what is going to happen from one day to the next. We're living in times of almost total uncertainty. I think a perfect example of that was the Gulf War. In December, or in the beginning of January 1991, nobody on this planet could say where the world was going to be in 3 months' time. It was clear we were moving towards war. Nobody knew what the outcome was. People had their preferred opinions, but nobody knew. It was total uncertainty.
Yes, and you point out that one of the real deep issues for managers is the issue of control. After all, you know, that's what management's supposed to be about.
This is the big problem. They're trying to control the situation where the environment they're working in, the business environment, is changing from year to year, from month to month. And I see the companies, the organizations which are going to thrive in the future are going to be those which learn how to be flexible. They've got to respond to change with flexibility, which often means challenging the past, perhaps letting go of past ways of seeing things and being willing to look at things with fresh eyes when that's demanded of them.
I mean, like the restructuring of IBM that just took
Yes,
place.
I mean that's an example of a company. IBM has always been a company willing to change with times. I mean, it's fascinating. IBM actually made some of the most grandest mistakes in business history, like deciding that computers were not going to be a big enough industry to be worth getting into. They actually made a policy decision back in, I think it was 1956, where they said computers are not going to be significant, we'll ignore them. And then when they saw they were significant, they completely changed. And the same thing happened 10 years ago when people were bringing out personal computers. IBM made a policy decision that personal computers were not going to be a big thing and they weren't going to get into personal computers. And then when the personal computers took off, they changed. In 6 months, suddenly the IBM PC was everywhere. They're a company that can show flexibility when it needs to. I think that's what we're going to need more and more of.
Well, we certainly are, I think everybody would agree, in the information age. And the thing that worries me is that nobody defines information very well. I mean, you know, there's the raw bits, the data, which don't mean anything. And what we have to do somehow is to go from the bits to what my friend Kenneth Boulding calls the wits.
Yes.
You know, how do we go from information to wisdom?
Right. I think we need to be clear. I think there's a lot of confusion today between information and knowledge. And we're suffering information overload because we can't choose which information is useful. You're right, to begin with, there's data, which is just numbers. Basically, it's bits, noughts and ones. Out of the data, you see the patterns or the changes. If nothing's changing, I mean, if you're looking at the sun, all you're getting is constant information, it's constant data. There's no information there. If suddenly the data changes, you see a black spot, there's a sunspot, there is information. And so out of data, we draw the information. It's the patterns in the data or the changes in the data. But the information has no usefulness in itself. But out of the information, you can begin to draw general principles. And so you can start from those principles, develop knowledge. And then the next question is, what knowledge is useful? What knowledge helps us survive? And what knowledge doesn't? And how do you use the knowledge?
That's it.
And that's wisdom. Is how do you use the knowledge to actually help us as individuals and as a species get what we want?
Yes, I mean, really, when you think how far we are from even articulating that criterion for knowledge, that knowledge ought to be helping helping life survive and prosper on this planet, you know. I mean, that would be a real good tool, wouldn't it, for deciding what was information, what was noise, and what was misinformation.
Right.
And, you know, there's so much misinformation and disinformation in the system that people need to really be much more discriminating, don't they, about, you know, what they mean by information.
We've got to choose, which means actually turning the knob on the television off sometimes. Not reading everything in the paper because it's there, which is about saying, what is it that I actually need to improve the quality of my life or to help improve the quality of other people's lives? Because that's basically is our bottom line, to improve the quality of life.
Yes.
And actually choose the information that helps that, or choose the knowledge that helps that, and leave the rest alone. We don't need it.
No. That's right. I mean, now I raise this issue, you know, if I'm doing talks at business schools and things like that. And in a sense, there isn't much even in the curriculum of average colleges that gives people this, you know, this kind of critical view. And I don't know, do you find management education programs are beginning to really focus on this whole question of what data is irrelevant and how do we really clear out the clutter and separate the signal from the noise?
Well, I think most managers have to learn to do that if they're going to survive. There's so much information that comes through onto most managers' desks each day, just in their mail or on the computer systems. I think any manager who gets through more than 6 months of being a manager has learnt from just trial and error that they have to sift information, and they get pretty efficient at it.
You know, I can remember some funny stories and case studies about companies that were reasonably well managed until they brought in computerization, and then they flooded the top officer with so much extraneous information that the company began to be worse managed than it was before, just overloading these people. So, in a sense, I think you have a lot of experience in knowing how CEOs in companies are dealing with all of these crises that are going on in the world, and that they can no longer just stick with their knitting and the bottom line. How do you see that?
Well, I see what's happening is most people, well not most, but a large number of people in business are seeing two things. One, that they've really got to value the human being. They've always said, you know, the human being is our most important asset, but they've done very little about it. And I see the way management development, management training is going, and this is in Europe, but I gather it's very much the same here, is away from training in skills and techniques, but training in actually helping people develop themselves, become better human beings. They realize if you do that, then the quality of work is going to rise. So that's one trend which is becoming very clear. Just the last few years, if you look at the whole direction of training programs, they've moved from hard-edge training to the much softer human skills. The other thing I see is people really becoming deeply concerned about the environmental crisis. We often think, business, these are the capitalist pigs who are destroying the world. And sure, business does have the power to destroy the world and has done a lot of things that aren't very useful. But most of the people at the heads of organizations are deeply, deeply concerned about what is happening to the planet. They have children. They can see where things are going. And they really want to change things. But most of them are trapped between the needs of the organization, the values of the organization, which are basically economic, financial values. A company is set up with a financial mission, basically. And the human beings who work in it have human needs, human values. They want to see a future where their own quality of life is raised, where the planet, humanity continues to be here in the future. And the big issue for them is, how do you put these together? How do you express your values without destroying the company?
Yes, and it's really, it's there again, it's this systemic restructuring that has to happen, because you cannot blame a corporate executive who has to answer to the stockholders.
Right.
And the stockholders are still mostly into profit maximizing and getting the highest return. And, even that is changing, as you know. I mean, I've been involved in this socially responsible investing movement in the U.S., and I'm on the board of one of these mutual funds, the Calvert Social Investment Fund. And when we started that fund in 1982, all these Wall Street money managers just said we were going to lose our shirts. We were crazy. And what we said was, no, we have faith that there's a group of investors out there that care about their grandchildren and know the difference between speculating and investing. And that we are going to come up with a list of companies that are geared toward a more sustainable future and that are involved in cleaning up the planet rather than polluting it, in recycling, in shifting to solar energy and renewable energy, to organic agriculture, to less chemically grown foods and all of that kind of thing. And as you may know, the number of investors in this country now that are in that movement is about $650 billion worth of assets. And so there really is a general trend that I think peaked out after the Reagan years, that the whole idea of maximizing profit, everybody began to really question that at the end of the 80s, didn't they?
And I saw some major companies in Europe questioning that. They actually had this meeting across the board, a lot of different industries, and they basically said, if there's going to be any world in 10 or 15 years' time in which we can do business, we have to change our practices, because the way we're going, civilization is going to collapse.
Do you find in European corporations they're doing environmental audits?
Some are. They're beginning to. There's some corporations. It's creeping in. It's sort of the leading edge, but not a lot. But a few are just beginning. There's one company in Holland, BSO, computer company, which this year produced its annual report, and the first half was the complete financial audit, and the second half of the annual report was a complete environmental audit of everything they'd taken from the environment and everything they'd given back, and actually looking at what their debt was to the environment. And I think that's the future.
Yes, I mean, so once that becomes a standard, we have a thing in the U.S. now called the Valdez Principles, which the socially responsible investing movement put together, and they said, hey, we're not going to invest in any company unless they will sign on to the Valdez Principles, which said, sort of environmental audits, and very importantly, we want you to release this to the public. And so we've got, there's probably about 50 companies that have signed on, and what it's produced is that a lot of other companies have said, okay, well, we're going to produce our own set of environmental principles. So
I'll tell you something that's interesting happened in England just a week or two ago. A major bank in England has said that people who don't actually adhere to certain principles, like anybody who uses animals in testing their products, they can take their accounts elsewhere.
Wow.
Banks love accounts. They're actually saying, take your accounts elsewhere.
That's fascinating. Well, that's something about the British value system that the Brits just love animals, don't they? I mean, the animal rights movement is very strong there. But I mean, these value shifts are going on in governments too, and maybe the biggest crisis is in governments and foundations, academia. I know you were just recently talking to a group of foundation executives. What were you telling them?
I was basically looking behind the whole global crisis, which I think is now apparent to everybody, and seeing what is the real issue here, because I don't think it's just about how do we save the rainforest, how do we repair the ozone layer, how do we remove the third world debt. All these are symptoms of a deeper problem, which is a problem of human consciousness, of human values. And what I believe is, and this is what I was saying to them, if you only treat the symptoms, the disease will continue. What we have to do is, as well as treating the symptoms, of course we need to repair the ozone layer, but we also need to look at what is it in human beings that allows us to create these problems and to continue to allow them to happen. And that's the core illness, the human malaise, which we have to tend to. So I was actually laying that out for them and seeing that we have to really fund a shift in values. That's what really needs funding today.
Yes, and it's a very interesting thing that here we have new values moving now all around the world. I mean, suddenly democracy is growing all around the world. And it occurs to me that it's sort of ironic that my country, the USA, and my former country and your country, Britain, the two oldest democracies probably, are falling behind now. And you know, there's all of these people coming from Eastern Europe to watch what the Congress does, and they're appalled. I mean, they see all the corruption and the money and the PACs and the way the influence of mass media and the sound bites and the politicians are afraid of issues. And you know, we're having a real crisis in this country, I think.
Well, it's the same in England. I mean, Britain really it didn't invent democracy. I mean, the Greeks invented democracy, if anybody did. But we took democracy on in current times about 400 years ago with Parliament and voting. And we've stuck with a system that we invented 400 years ago. And we're stuck with the same, we've never upgraded it. You upgraded it a bit, but you're stuck with a system you invented 200 years ago. And you go to countries like West Germany or Sweden, which have systems which are only 50 years old and are much, much more democratic.
Well, now you don't have proportional representation in Britain yet, do you?
Oh no, that's crazy. I mean, you can have the Conservative Party can get 36% of the vote and control the whole country. What we have in England is basically elected dictatorship.
My gosh. Well, you know, we don't have proportional representation either. You know, we have this thing called the Electoral College, and we've had occasions in this country in the last century where the raw vote would have elected the other candidate, but when they counted the Electoral College, the one who got less votes in the aggregate would become president. And it's kind of interesting, though, when you see in the U.S. There's this tremendous sort of cultural crisis going on, and a lot of dissatisfaction. I'm sure you've been noticing this. And for the first time in an election in a long time, an independent candidate is emerged who could be viable. I'm talking about H. Ross Perot. And funnily enough, he's been talking about the information age for many, many years. In other words, that we could have electronic democracy.
Yes.
We could have electronic town meetings, and you wouldn't have to go down to polling places and queue up. You could put a smart card in your TV set and vote at home. You could have a referenda on these issues. You know, we could have the public discuss issues on two-way television. People could put their opinions in on 800 numbers. And that technology has been available for two decades.
Yes. I'd love to see that happen. My personal feeling is it won't happen here. It'll happen in some new country which can start it off. I think here the politicians in power are too scared of losing their power. That's why we don't have proportional representation or true democracy in England, because the politicians in power would lose their jobs immediately.
Yes.
And they, like so many people, they're so self-centered, they want to hold on to their own power and influence, that they're not going to allow these systems to come in easily. So I think we're going to see these systems probably be developed in other countries first of all. But it's there. We have the potential for the first time in history to really have democracy where the people vote on issues rather than vote for people to then do what they want.
Oh, the political science professors go crazy when you talk about this, you know, because they're not really ready for referenda, and of course they worry that, and of course it does rely on the people being educated. I mean, you know, Thomas Jefferson was right about that. But I mean, there have been experiments like the televote that they did in New Zealand in 1980, where they talked about the values, and so, you know, there are many efforts, I think, now to overcome this. But in a sense, it's very interesting that we're at this global situation now, where it's the end of the Cold War, and the world is no longer divided into East versus West, and the new issues are all North versus South, and the issues of the haves and the have-nots. I mean, that's where all new conflicts are going to come from. And I don't know whether you have any particular thoughts on how this is going to affect corporations. I mean, what I find is corporations are still don't want to get their feet wet in the South. They don't understand that they're potentially huge markets for the right kind of, you know, green technologies. And
I think there are. I think the way most of us treat the South is still an exploitative attitude. I mean, we're taking continually from the South. The money flow is still from the South to the North. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and that is not a recipe for a stable situation.
No,
Definitely.
I mean, because in a sense that was part of the Gulf War, was a haves versus have-nots war, and it was a war around resources. And so, you know, we're going to see more of this. Well, you know, fundamentally it's very interesting to me if you look at the unfolding of the Industrial Revolution that's now kind of coming to an end as we're moving into the information age, the post-industrial period, that in a sense at the end of the Cold War we can look and see that both Karl Marx and Adam Smith basically agreed about industrialism. They thought it was great, you know, let's industrialize everything and have technological efficiency and more material goods, and maybe that was why the Cold War was so bitter.
Partly, I think they also agreed on a more fundamental level. They both agreed that human beings were selfish. And capitalism said, let's use self-interest to drive society. And communism said, let's suppress self-interest. And I think both are wrong, because self-interest alone doesn't work. And there's a marvelous book came out about a year ago, Adam Smith's Mistake, which showed that basically Adam Smith cut out benevolence, and that the only way self-interest will work is if you have benevolence as well. Otherwise, all that self-interest says is cheat as much as you can, but don't get caught.
Yes. And to organize two sets of industrial societies, one around enforced competition and the other around enforced cooperation, and one around greed and the other one around envy. I mean, it was a really silly way of organizing the world, wasn't it?
You've got, I think the ultimate has to be a synthesis of self-interest with compassion, with benevolence. You've got to have the two together. And communism had one, which was the social good, and that fell apart. And the other system is just the self-interest, and that's falling apart now. And I think, whereas when communism fell, it was Russia and Eastern Europe which fell. Here, when capitalism falls, it's going to be the world, because the impacts of the capitalist system are global, particularly in terms of the environment.
Well, it's very interesting, isn't it? Okay, communism went down in flames. And the triumph of capitalism, I think, will be rather short-lived, because we are dealing now with all of the problems of how to restructure capitalism so that it does deal with these new values and these new moral concerns and goes just beyond the bottom line. So the New World Order is going to be something very different, isn't it? I mean, some people think that the only superpower in the world from here on in is going to have to be the United Nations. And I think for right now, if it weren't there, we'd have to invent it.
Maybe,
And in a sense, I don't know whether you feel that we're moving toward, I mean, are you encouraged about the possibilities of moving toward a new world order?
I think it's possible. I feel we're in precarious times. They could go either way. I like to focus on the opportunities ahead of us. I think only by doing that can we see what we need to do to change.
Well, we're running out of time, and I want to thank you very much, Peter Russell, our guest Peter Russell from England. And this has been Worth Quoting from Florida Community College at Jacksonville. Thank you.